Infinite Warfare is perhaps one of the most controversial games in the Call of Duty franchise, for the simple fact that right off the bat, it didn't really fit the mold of what we thought a Call of Duty title was, and that's understandable. We had a Call of Duty game going to space, being set on different planets and moons. It was certainly a stretch by comparison to the classics the game grew to popularity with, rooted in a realistic fictional approach to a global conflict. Infinite Warfare was also hot off the heels of Black Ops 3, sharing plenty of the similar mechanics, and was the third year of a 3-year exosuit or advanced movement generation that at the time of launch was met with a little fatigue likely kicking in. But how does the game play now, almost 4 years later after its launch? Has the reception changed at all? Does the gameplay feel good after all this time and reacclimating to boots on the ground environment in Call of Duty? Well, today we're going to be taking a look at Infinite Warfare in 2020, continuing on our retrospective Call of Duty series here on the channel. As we go along, let me know your thoughts down below. What are your thoughts on the game? Has your perception changed as time progressed? Did you think it was a good or bad game? Whatever it is, let me know down in the comments. As well, if you are new to the channel and enjoy retrospective looks at Call of Duty titles like this, as well as the newest things revolving around Modern Warfare, Warzone, and soon to be Black Ops Cold War, do be sure to hit the subscribe button if you have not done so already. But anyways, let's take a look at Infinite Warfare in 2020. One thing that I like to start out with when doing these retrospective videos is a relatively simple question, but one that is incredibly important to the gameplay experience. How easy is it to find a lobby? Well, finding lobbies within Infinite Warfare was still pretty easy. Full transparency, I gathered a lot of the gameplay for this video late at night, so that most certainly would skew the results of finding lobbies towards finding lobbies a little slower, because an already smaller population on an older game becomes even smaller when it's at times that most people would be sleeping, or I guess rather should be sleeping. But even through that, I was finding games with relative ease, very little waiting time between hitting to queue for a match and finding a lobby that would then fill my spot. I would admittedly find a lot of the same matches and lobbies, but still I had a healthy variance in terms of who I was playing against. And in terms of the player styles and player base that I was encountering, that is something that, just like Call of Duty World War II, where we detailed this last week, some people were still seasoned veterans going upwards of Prestige 30 and that max level, and then there were also some that weren't even prestiged, but a healthy mix of high versus low levels as well, which made for a decent gameplay experience in every single match. You didn't know the outcome when going into it, really. You could stomp, get stomped, or just have a competitive back and forth. As for the gameplay itself, I think perhaps one of the biggest things with Infinite Warfare were the mechanics. Mechanically, I always thought this game was pretty sound for what it was. For an advanced movement COD, I always thought that it was fluid, and with so much similar to Black Ops 3, I always from the beginning, even though I didn't play it all that much over the main year of support, I always considered this to be a sort of extension of Black Ops 3 and a sort of ironing out of the mechanics from that game. Very similar in terms of what was on offer, but while both felt very smooth in their own rights, Infinite Warfare just had that extra polish to me, if that makes sense. I think perhaps the most prominent example of the fluidity was in the boost jumps and the wall runs. If you were playing with a controller, you may have just felt that in your hands, that it felt a little bit more fluid. And I keep using that term, but truth be told, I can't think of anything better than that right now to accurately describe that. I definitely think that when going back to things like the boost jumps, it didn't feel like it extended as far or as long as it did in Black Ops 3, which could be something that led to that feeling, but it also was enough of a difference from Black Ops 3 to Infinite Warfare that it made it feel like a little bit of its own. Hit detection was spotty, but again, that's something that can be expected for not only an older game, but also playing at later portions of the evening, where the player base is spread even more thin. And this was, I think, right at the time of the first introductions of hybrid systems for these servers, if I'm not mistaken, where either in Black Ops 3 it was also like this, or shortly there before, but I did actually have a match where it was on peer-to-peer connection at that point because we had a reconnecting to a new host. The player that was the host backed out, and so therefore we all had to reconnect to the next player in line. As a result of, again, the time frame of when being played, these servers not necessarily having as many players to pull from, and therefore connections being spread a little thin, that also created not only imbalance with the hit detection, but some solid lag at times as well. Coming back to some gameplay mechanics, automatic healing was definitely something that, even though WoW was a staple thing back then, we had no reason to think that we would ever not see automatic healing. It definitely was interesting to go back again, as with any other Call of Duty game, after having Modern Warfare and Black Ops 4, two games that really heavily stressed manually healing. So it took a few games to get fully adjusted to it going back to this. Creator class was great to see, a classic pick 10 system. Weaponry was a nice mix of futuristic, classic, and weapons that were futuristic but are based upon real weaponry like the NV4. The combat rig was an interesting take on Specialist here that kind of made Specialist but a little more in-depth, with each rig offering a payload and a trait, one that you could take, but 3 options for each payload and trait of each rig. So a lot more in-depth that you could play around with with here with it, but one that maybe it's just me, but I found one that I liked in terms of FTL, and I played around with phase shift as the payload and the passive trait of power slide basically all year. As soon as I unlocked that, I just had a ton of fun with it, never really changed it, and so therefore that was kind of my main. Recoil on weapons, there was definitely some, but there were weapons that you definitely wouldn't notice it on as well. So an interesting in between there that we talked about also within World War II, where there really weren't quite full dedicated recoil systems in place at this point. Overall though, the gameplay experience was still pretty solid, and if I were to say jump back as somebody that hasn't played this in a while, you'd still probably be able to enjoy it at its core. Again, does it feel like Call of Duty? That's entirely up to you, but the gameplay itself still feels solid for what it is. Now, as always with these retrospective looks, I do want to take a second to talk about some positives that I think came out of Infinite Warfare. Even though it was a game that was heavily written off very early on into its life cycle, there were still a bunch of things that I think were shining pieces of Infinite Warfare. While it's not necessarily any part of what you'd expect in terms of maybe a retrospective look at multiplayer, campaign in this game was brilliant. I don't know if you guys played it or not. I don't really want to give any spoilers, but the campaign was incredibly well written, I think. And again, even though it's not necessarily what you consider Call of Duty, going to space, going to different planets and moons, the narrative behind it was fantastic. The music score as well is phenomenal. I absolutely love the main menu music of Infinite Warfare, and I think it's probably one of my favorites that doesn't really get recognized as much as the others. Of course, you have those iconic ones like throughout the Modern Warfare series and the Black Ops series, but Infinite Warfare also was incredibly well done, I think. Again, the gameplay was fluid. It felt like it compounded on top of some of what we already knew with Black Ops 3 and polished it off a little further. Mission teams added a new level of depth to gain XP and also some rewards in terms of, say, weaponry. You could end up getting different variants for weapons just by simply ranking up your mission team, which is really cool, I thought. Added a little bit more in terms of grind-worthy content. One thing that was fantastic that was introduced within Infinite Warfare and we saw continue on into World War II, I don't know if it still is the case here in recent games. I haven't heard any chatter in terms of the developmental process of this, but Infinite Warfare actually introduced a new system where maps would load in the background of pre-game lobbies. So that means that while the countdown was ticking down, it would actually then load up the map behind that so that you had a quicker infill sequence where you could just jump right into the action instead of having to sit there on a static loading screen for 10, 15, 20 seconds at a time and then jump into the action. So that was a really cool feature that kind of went unnoticed and was something that during the main year of support wasn't really all that talked about, but it was a huge step forward in terms of actually loading into games. But again, that was so minor to so many people that it was maybe something that went unnoticed entirely. One thing that I also personally loved was some of the depth of the stat tracking that happened within Infinite Warfare. I loved some of the post-game kill death maps. Those I thought were a really cool addition to me. While things like leaderboards took a couple of months to get into the game after the launch, there was a ton of stat tracking that was added on after all of that also. So after a while, yes, it did finally all come together, but I think the final product was pretty nice in terms of that stat tracking. One thing that I also thought Infinity Ward had a fun time designing, and I think it showed in the product, was that of some of the camos. Of course, we had things like Black Sky, which was the grinder's dream if you were to go for it, because you had to complete X amount of prestiges, get those classic weapons already maxed out as well, and then end up completing all the camo challenges for all the weapons. That was something that took a lot of time, but even things like your challenges, your quartermaster camos, your extra camos, those things were really cool to look at and made for some awesome camos. One thing that I liked as opposed to other Infinity Ward games was that there actually seemed to be a little bit more of a push for vibrance in the color palette. You had colors that stood out within the game instead of just the drab, muddy colors that we usually see that denote a little bit more realism perhaps within Infinity Ward titles. That usually makes games visually more appealing, which I'm all for. I like that, the color theory behind that, but it was cool to see, again, a little bit more color added into the game as well. The next thing I want to talk about is something we talked a little bit about within our retrospective look at World War II, but that being a positive push towards microtransactions. Infinite Warfare was almost smack dab in the middle of the entire sort of microtransaction era that plagued Call of Duty. From Advanced Warfare with supply drops to Black Ops 3 with weapons and a ton of filler in supply drops, Infinite Warfare at least followed up a little nicer here with this. It didn't have things like collections like Modern Warfare Remastered and COD World War II did, but it offered a lot of things that tried to mitigate some of those supply drops that you'd become dependent upon for new weapon variants, new cosmetics, and things like that. There were login bonuses to reward play with salvage and supply drops even for season pass holders. The quartermaster offered keys earned by playtime and contract completion. If I'm not mistaken, you could also get bonuses completing mission team contracts as well. Supply drops could be earned in both rare and common supply drop variations, but the armory was a big introduction here that offered a ton that you could actually craft with an in-game currency called salvage. Now, this offered a ton of different things that you could do with just simply stuff you earned via playtime and also through things that you had in duplicates of supply drops. So you kind of had this chain of how you'd work out things, with keys offering you an option to end up getting supply drops, but then the more duplicates you acquire, the more salvage you got. Plus, if you ended up getting login bonuses of salvage, that would help out big time as well. And then you could craft anything that you wanted just for your simple playtime. Now, was it as good as Modern Warfare Remastered and World War II's microtransaction system? I think that those were still a little bit better, but this was at least a push in the positive direction, whereas we saw Black Ops 3 and Advanced Warfare kind of really go all out on it. One cool thing in terms of the quartermaster was that for a time there was the quartermaster cipher, which we didn't really know anything about at the time, but finally it was broken, and what it gave was bundles of dupe protected drops, if I'm not mistaken. That was a one-time use thing on your account unless you glitched it, which people got banned for that, but that was a cool little puzzle that people tried to figure out for a long while. One also thing that was nice at the time that, again, in sort of a fatigue of this isn't really worth it, was that of the season pass. The season pass was good because it offered up new maps, but bad in just about every other way because, again, there was that paywall that we don't see anymore with Modern Warfare. It broke up lobbies because people didn't get the maps, and so therefore they wouldn't be able to queue with their friends that did, and the list could go on and on here. But what was nice is that the season pass in Infinite Warfare at least offered a little bit more value because it allowed players with the season pass to get new DLC weapons for free immediately. Pass holders got those with absolutely no extra charge, and they were immediately there. But if you didn't have the pass, it wasn't something that was too big of a hindrance to your gameplay experience. These were also offered up for free, but in the format of in-game challenges to be unlocked, like how we see within Modern Warfare. So overall, the sort of MTX platform leveled out a little bit and got a little bit of a reform as opposed to Black Ops 3 and Advanced Warfare, and that was something that at the time I was incredibly happy to see. Now, overall, I think the only thing that I would say is the personal downfall, in my opinion, for Infinite Warfare was that it was too much like Black Ops 3. I know that's the reason that I didn't really play it throughout its main year of support, because it felt like a Black Ops 3.5 to me. And with the beta at the very beginning of the game, more so being a demo because it actually did get pressed to gold and certified as a game that was going to ship as such when the beta came around, at launch, there really wasn't a whole ton to keep me engaged that felt new, because I experienced basically the whole game for 2 weeks, a month before the game actually launched. Now, at that point, I was almost burned out by the beta because we had nothing new to really explore. But also kind of adding to that fatigue factor and feeling that nothing was too new is that I remember back in the day, while we'll never know the truth about these sort of things, this will never actually come out as verified, there was this rumor the game was never meant to be Infinite Warfare, and instead it was going to be a follow-up to Ghost, which maybe that would have been hated even more, maybe it would have been received better, who knows? But the rumor was that it was changed halfway through, so the game had half a life cycle to be developed, and therefore was a rushed development that didn't ever really fit how it was supposed to. And so therefore, it was also rumored that Treyarch was doing a lot of catch-up work on the game as well to get it polished off and to get it ready to ship for Infinity Ward. Those two teams kind of working in tandem on it. So if that would be the case, that would essentially explain why it felt so much like a Black Ops 3, because it had a lot of the people working on it. Again, we'll never really know about that, and personally, I just didn't care to play it all that much because it did feel the same in such a regard to me, but that's where I was at the time. But going back, again, it feels fluid, it feels good, you can find matches, you can find games, and it is a nice breakaway if you want to try something out from the jetpack era once again. So that's where we're at here with this. That is Call of Duty Infinite Warfare within 2020. And I'd love to get your thoughts and feedback down in the comments down below. Have you gone back and played this since its main year of support? Did you ever like the game? Did you not like the game? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you drop a like down below. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so there's a single thing regarding all things retrospective looks at Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, Warzone, and of course, Black Ops Cold War coming up here very, very soon. If you also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best places to get connected outside of YouTube. Practically live on both those. If you guys want to start a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.